Hello there, my name's Alasdair Northrop and I'm a Blue Badge tourist guide and a member of the Scottish Tourist Guides Association. My story begins at this old canal built between 1817 and 1822. The Union Canal provided a new way of crossing from the east coast to the west coast of Scotland during a time of transformation for the country. Before then, the only choice was taking a rough and tough track across country. Shortly after the construction of the canal started, an Irishman called William Burke came to work on it as a labourer after abandoning his wife in Ireland, following an argument over land ownership with his father-in-law. Burke, who had previously served in the British Army, was reportedly an amicable fellow. He met up with Scott's lass Helen MacDougall, also known as Nellie, in the village of Maddiston near Falkirk, and they later set up home together. Around the same time, William Hare left his home in Northern Ireland to work on the canal for 7 years. He was described by some sources as a quarrelsome, violent, immoral character. There is some speculation that the men met while building the canal, or alternatively when they were both harvest workers at Pennycook on the outskirts of Edinburgh. One way or another, they did become friends, and later two of the most notorious murderers in history. Between them, over a period of less than a year, they are said to have murdered 16 people. But what turned them into murderers, and why did they kill so many people? The answer starts here, where there was once a lodging house in Tanner's Close run by Hare and his common-law wife Margaret. Hare had originally been a lodger at the house, but after Margaret's husband died, he became her lover. Among their lodgers was William Burke and Helen MacDougall, but also an old soldier called Donald, who survived off an army pension. Donald was £4 in arrears while waiting for the next instalment of his pension to be paid when he died of dropsy. Hare feared he would not recover the rent money and discussed the matter with Burke. The two came up with a plan. At the time, Edinburgh was a fast-growing centre of medical teaching, and that involved the gruesome but necessary practice of showing students the insides of the human body. The most popular anatomy class was run by Dr. Robert Knox, who had as many as 500 students at his twice-a-day sessions. His problem, and that of his colleagues, was the shortage of dead bodies. By law, only the corpses of people who died in prison, suicide victims, and most bizarrely, bodies of foundlings and orphans could be used. As a result, there was a spate of grave robberies throughout Scotland, and cadavers were eagerly brought with no questions asked by teaching hospitals. Burke and Hare decided to sell Donald's body and came here to Surgeon Square, where Knox worked from. Although they did not meet Knox face to face, he agreed via one of his employees to pay £7 10 shillings for the corpse. Significantly, Burke was told by Knox's assistant that he'd be glad to see them again when they had another to dispose of. Nearly 2 months later, Burke and Hare were to return to Knox, but this time the body in question was the victim of murder. There is some dispute about whether the first victim was a miller called Joseph or an old lady called Abigail Simpson who sold salt to supplement her pension. Joseph was another of Hare's lodgers and was suffering from a fever and in a bad state. Having a fever in those days was a bit like having COVID today. It was very likely to spread, and above all, for Hare, it was bad for business. After plying their victim with whiskey, Hare allegedly suffocated the poor lodger while the burly Burke held him down. They took the body to Knox, who paid them £10. That started the ball rolling, and they started killing at a rate of around a person a month. The victims include at least 5 elderly ladies, together with the daughter of one of them and the grandson of another. They are also believed to have murdered an unnamed English male lodger and a poor young woman called Mary Patterson, a lady called Effie, who made a living by selling what she found in rubbish tips, a washerwoman, and a female relative of Helen MacDougall, who made the fatal mistake of visiting her. Hare also killed an unnamed woman on his own when Burke was away. The White Hart Inn is one of the oldest surviving pubs in Edinburgh and was said to be frequented by Burke and Hare looking for victims who were the worse for drink and ideally not well known. But as time went on, they appeared to become less careful, and their last 2 victims led to them being arrested as murderers. Unlike many of their victims, 18-year-old beggar James Wilson was a well-known figure on the streets of Edinburgh. He had deformed feet which caused him to limp and was also mentally disabled and had the nickname Daft Jamie. One day Hare saw him and invited him back to his lodgings. Normally they got their victims extremely drunk on whiskey, but Jamie preferred snuff, so his murder was a particularly violent one. When some of Knox's students saw Jamie's bodies, they recognised him and he got into a panic. By the time of the main dissection, his head and feet had been removed to avoid further recognition by other students. The final victim was a middle-aged Irish woman called Margaret Docherty. Burke had persuaded her that his mother came from the same part of Ireland as her and enticed her back to the lodging house run by his cousin Brougham, where he was now living, for whiskey. He made an excuse to get more whiskey, but actually went to fetch Hare. Two other lodgers at Broggan's, Anne and James Gray, were persuaded to stay at Hare's lodging on the pretext that Margaret was a relative and was now staying overnight. The next day the Greys returned to Broggan's to fetch some stockings, but Burke would not let her near a bed where she had left them. Later, when Burke left, the Greys went into the bedroom and found Docherty's body in a pile of straw. The shocked couple immediately went to tell the police, but when they came to the house, the body was not to be found, though they discovered blood-stained clothing under the bed. Burke and his wife claimed Docherty had gone, but they contradicted each other on timings and the police took them in for questioning. Early the next morning, the police went to Knox's premises and discovered the body in his dissecting rooms. The Lord Advocate, Sir William Ray, decided the best way to get a conviction was to offer immunity to Hare in return for a full confession, which could be used in a trial against Burke. Hare's wife was also made exempt from prosecution. At the time, that was an acceptable procedure, but obviously it would not happen today. Burke and MacDougall were put on trial for the murders of Mary Patterson, James Wilson and Mrs. Docherty. The trial started on Christmas Eve 1828 and continued throughout the night and into the following morning. 300 constables were on duty here to prevent disturbances, while infantry and cavalry were on standby as a further precaution. The jury retired to consider its verdict at 8:30 a.m. on Christmas Day and returned 50 minutes later. It delivered a guilty verdict against Burke for the murder of Docherty. The same charge against MacDougall they found not proven. Judge Boyle told Burke that his body would be publicly dissected and anatomised. He added, "I trust that if it is ever customary to preserve skeletons, yours will be preserved in order that posterity may keep in remembrance of your atrocious crimes." MacDougall was released and left Edinburgh, never to be seen again. Burke made post-trial confessions in which he placed much of the blame for the murders on Hare. Hare's wife Margaret went back to Ireland and again was not heard of again. Burke was hanged here at Lawn Market on the morning of 28th of January 1829 in front of a crowd possibly as large as 25,000. Views from windows in the tenements overlooking the scaffold were hired at prices ranging from 5 shillings to 20 shillings, which was a fortune at that time. On the 1st of February, Burke's corpse was publicly dissected by Professor Monro in the Anatomy Theatre of the University's Old College. During the procedure, which lasted for 2 hours, Monro dipped his quill pen into Burke's blood and wrote, "This is written with the blood of William Burke, who was hanged at Edinburgh. This blood was taken from his head." Burke's skeleton was given to the Anatomical Museum of Edinburgh Medical School, where, as at 2021, it remains. His death mask and a book said to be bound with his tanned skin can be seen at Surgeons' Hall Museum. Hare was released on the 5th of February 1829 and fled to England, where he disappeared. However, there were stories that he had been recognised and acid thrown in his face, blinding him. As a result, he spent his last days as a blind beggar. Knox refused to say anything about the events, but was publicly lampooned. A burning effigy of Knox was burned outside his house by a crowd that had gathered there. A committee of inquiry cleared him of complicity and reported that they had seen no evidence that Dr. Knox or his assistants knew that murder was committed in procuring any of the subjects brought to his rooms. He resigned from his position as curator of the College of Surgeons Museum and was gradually excluded from university life by his peers. He left Edinburgh in 1842 and lectured in Britain and mainland Europe. From 1856 he worked as a pathological anatomist at the Brompton Cancer Hospital and had a medical practice in Hackney until his death in 1862, 33 years after Burke was hanged.